Hi, this is Becca.
And this is Eric.
And you are listening to Chatterbox. Before we begin, I just want to give our announcements first, and I would also like to introduce my co-host, Eric, today. Eric has never recorded with me before, and he is going to be our backup co-host when Kyla is out of town. Kyla is currently in Hawaii, so she is enjoying her time in the tropics. Meanwhile, me and Eric are actually on vacation right now. We're recording in our hotel room in Traverse City, Michigan. All right, as a quick reminder, if you like what we do here, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. We love building this community of free thinkers who want to learn and be a part of our Chatterbox community. So whether you are a new or returning listener, please tell your friends about us and hit that subscribe button if you enjoy our content. Now I would like for Eric to introduce himself.
Hi, everybody. My name is Eric. This will be my first time ever doing something like this. I'm definitely a bit nervous. I'm Becca's husband, and yeah, I'm excited to try this out.
Yeah, Eric listens to podcasts. He's a Joe Rogan podcast fan, as well as You Like Kill Tony, and yeah, he listens to a lot of the bro podcasts, but I do listen to a few bro podcasts. I love listening to Two Bears One Cave. I love Bert and Tom Bert Kreischer and Tom Segura. My brain wanted to say Tom Hanks for some reason. As you know, Kyla is our co-host, so whenever she is out of town and we cannot coordinate a recording day together just due to, our schedules being different, Eric will be our backup co-host. So we've been together for 7 years this year. It's been a wild ride as parents to our son, new parents to yeah, Walter. He's actually almost a year and a half now. So we have a beautiful little family. We're busy taking care of him as well as working full-time jobs. And then on top of that, me doing this podcast. So it's very busy, but we make it work. But before we dive into today's episode, I want to give a quick disclaimer. I am not a mental health professional, and what I am sharing today is based on my personal experience, research, and observations. Schizophrenia is going to be our topic today, if you didn't know by clicking on the video. Schizophrenia is a complex and serious mental health condition. It requires a mental health professional to diagnose you, to give you the correct care and attention that is necessary. If you or someone that you love is experiencing symptoms like hearing voices, feeling disconnected from reality, or any other signs of a potential mental illness, I encourage you to seek help or to encourage them to seek help. Mental professionals can help provide support, guidance, and diagnosis when necessary, so please remember this podcast is meant for informational purposes as well as discussion purposes only. Never replace advice or just research for what your current diagnosis is. So, without further ado, let's get into our interesting topic. So, the word schizophrenia is less than 100 years old, but the mental illness itself was first diagnosed in medical journals in 1887. But there's actual documentation of this mental illness, which was known as madness back in the Egyptian era. It was also known as a mental disturbance. So a lot of quote-unquote mental disturbances, including being mentally handicapped, for a long time was lumped into the same category. Other mental illnesses such as like depression, dementia, those were also labeled as mental disturbances for a long time. So What that means is that they were kind of just like thrown in insane asylums and kind of forced to be with a bunch of crazy people, even though they weren't really crazy.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely been a lot of things probably been not that good to people, especially experiencing this type of thing.
Well, we're actually in Traverse City right now, and we did not know that there is a insane asylum turned into, first of all, shopping center, then also senior living center. There's like law offices in there. It's super weird and eerie. And while we were there, I was like, the energy there just felt so weird. Like, just super weird energy in there, like dark energy. It felt like you were in like an old school or a hospital. So, early theories about schizophrenia in most cultures, it was taught that this was more of a demonic possession. So, it was not until a German physician named Emily Kraepelin, Dr. Kraepelin, used the term dementia precox for people who had symptoms known as schizophrenia. That's what we associate it with now, anyways. And schizophrenia was known as madness throughout much of civilization's history. And thousands of years of mental illness has been misinterpreted and people not getting the correct care or treatment that they deserved. And that was due to the medical community not taking mental illnesses seriously for the longest time. A lot of people in my growing up area would say that depression is not a real mental illness. They would say, you just need to pray more. And I find that absolute BS. So, like, yes, you can pray all you want, but that's not going to make your depression go away. I mean, depression is a literal imbalance in your brain. And it has to also do with the way that you are thinking, 100%. Although some people say that they are predispositioned to have those thoughts all the time, I feel bad for them. I guess I can't say that I understand because I've had depression, but through reading kind of like self-help books and also kind of changing my diet, changing certain things, my activity levels, all of that contributed to me not being depressed anymore. So, but I know that having depression is different for everybody. So, in the history of schizophrenia, Dr. W.A.F. Brown, best known English psychiatrist of his generation, wrote, "Insanity then is not an inordinate or irregular or impaired action of the mind, of the instincts, of the sentiments, intellectual or perceptive powers, but it depends on and is produced by organic changes in the brain." So I find that interesting. But in the same year, American psychiatry actually considered schizophrenia as a physical disorder and disease of the brain. It would be 150 years at that point until it could be proven in the 1980s with brain imaging technology that evidence of schizophrenia and manic depressive disorder are diseases of the brain, just as multiple sclerosis, Parkinson's, or Alzheimer's. So there is actually physical evidence that people with schizophrenia have significant loss of brain gray matter, which this actually also happens while you are pregnant.
I can attest to that. You got
It makes you more forgetful.
it. That's what you put it.
That's just one symptom of that.
It's never came back. Since then, you still put places everywhere. It's right in front of you.
I lose things all the time. It's just part of my personality at this point, okay? So, people who have schizophrenia have reduced gray matter volume in the brain, especially in the temporal and frontal lobes. Recently, neuroscientists have detected gray matter in the loss of at least 25% in some areas. And this damage spreads over time. Patients with the worst loss of gray matter includes symptoms such as hallucinations, delusions, bizarre and psychotic thoughts, hearing voices, and depression. There are also other symptoms such as enlarged ventricles in the brain. Individuals with schizophrenia, including those who have never been treated, typically have very large ventricles in the brain. Large ventricles. This is actually demonstrated over 100 personal studies up to date. So, individuals with manic depressive disorder also have an enlarged amygdala and increased white matter. People with schizophrenia often deal with impaired cognitive function, such as people with manic depressive disorder. So, this affects your information processing and your verbal memory. And you also deal with decreased prefrontal brain action and function. So this means the part of the brain where you plan and think for yourself and, this is what I'm going to do with my day. That area is showing significantly decreased function. They also deal with impaired awareness. This means that they don't really make decisions in their best interest. They lack awareness to take their medication. They lack awareness to do any kind of self-analysis. So maybe, not showering for 2 to 3 weeks, and they just don't have the awareness to do so. Now, you're probably wondering, can certain drugs induce a schizophrenic psychosis? Because this is something that I have always wondered. So, if you've ever heard the phrase that drugs mess with your mind, there is actually some truth to that. So, certain recreational drugs can produce something or lead to something known as psychosis. And this psychosis can share a lot of similar symptoms with schizophrenia, but there is a difference. So, we're going to talk about that difference. So, some hallucinogens, such as LSD, magic mushrooms, and PCP, can make you see things, hear things.
Yep.
And this actually is symptoms of schizophrenia. But what's interesting, though, is that people who already have some type of vulnerability to schizophrenia, let's say you have somebody in your family who has been predispositioned to this mental illness. Let's just say if you take these specifically, you can trigger a psychotic episode, and it doesn't create long-term mental health issues unless you are predispositioned to having schizophrenia. So normally it can be hereditary, but people who have not had it in their family can develop it on their own. They don't really know the cause for schizophrenia yet. Then there are stimulants such as cocaine and methamphetamine. These drugs can put your brain into overdrive, creating the sense of paranoia, agitation, and delusional thinking, which are common signs of psychosis, but these are also short-term reactions to those drugs. So for people who use those substances frequently or in large amounts, can have that paranoia, always thinking that they're trying to drive somewhere. They're like, oh, the cops are behind me. They're after me. So that's kind of part of the psychosis state.
If you have cops behind you, they still suck, whether you're sober or not. So
yeah. We all get a little paranoid if a cop pulls up next to us. I mean, with this, it would be more of like their level of paranoia can be way worse than what we would just experience if we were doing those things, which we don't. And now, you might be surprised about this, but marijuana can trigger a cannabis-induced psychosis for especially young teens and younger adults. So this often includes extreme paranoia and hallucinations, and it's not completely unlike what you would see with schizophrenia, but the tricky part is to know how much cannabis use is going to contribute to the onset of schizophrenia, or if the cannabis is making existing symptoms worse than what they already are. So if you already have a predisposition to psychosis, then doing any kind of substances can kind of trigger that. Alcohol, especially chronic alcohol, can also lead to psychosis. Somebody who's withdrawing from alcohol after being a heavy drinker for a long time can have psychosis that involve hallucinations as well as delusions. And these are for the people who do like severe dependence on alcohol. And this is a very intense withdrawal process. You get a much more intense withdrawal process from alcohol than you do from like smoking weed, for instance.
Die from withdrawal from alcohol, not weed.
Yeah. Yeah, and then it's also very weird that weed is so much more regulated than alcohol, even though the symptoms from withdrawal alcohol can legitimately kill you. So I find that so weird. But it is important to note here that not all drug-induced psychosis is the same as schizophrenia, and the big difference is that psychosis caused by drugs can, for the most part, be very temporary. Once the substance leaves the system, the symptoms typically subside. So schizophrenia, on the other hand, is a lifelong condition, typically requiring medication and therapy for management. The key here is that while drug-induced psychosis can be alarming and intense, it does not mean that someone that is doing those things has schizophrenia, unless maybe this is like a reoccurring problem, getting a psychosis-like state after, let's say smoking or doing hallucinogens, for instance. But if they are, let's say, having these issues when always doing those substances, then they may have an underlying health condition. So other major differences lies in the cause. So schizophrenia is thought to be the result of a mix of genetic factors and environmental stressors, while drug-induced psychosis is more directly tied to the substance use. So people who abuse drugs might have psychotic symptoms, especially if they continue to do them, and they do have experiences like someone with schizophrenia, but they are not the same. So, just very interesting things to note there. I kind of thought that was interesting because I know people who have, let's say they've smoked weed or have done hallucinogens, and they have had very weird and crazy experiences, and that has made them never want to do them again.
Scary ones, that's how you learn.
Yeah, there's nothing like a bad trip to make you want to be scared for the rest of your life. Just kidding, just part of it, but
And straightens you out sometimes.
sometimes.
Sometimes, at least for a little while. At least for a little bit.
Important figures to note throughout history and in our time who have had schizophrenia or supposed schizophrenia. We're going to go through a few here. So, Zelda Fitzgerald is known for being very flamboyant. She was diagnosed with schizophrenia in her early 30s and had many severe mental breakdowns. She ended up spending 2 decades in psychiatric hospitals from ages 27 to 47 and is noted to have died at the age of 47. So there's one. Then there's John Nash, who is Nobel Prize winner and brilliant mathematician. He was very open about his struggles with schizophrenia and says that he was very thankful for his mental illness because he was able to unlock many mathematical discoveries. So that's interesting. Vincent van Gogh, I actually did not know this, Vincent van Gogh reportedly heard voices and experienced hallucinations, although he was never diagnosed. It is highly speculated that he had mental illness or a mental illness of some kind. And in the last 2 years of his life...
You don't cut your ear off for no reasons.
Yeah, on July 27th of 1890, Vincent van Gogh walked into a wheat field behind a French village and shot himself in the chest. And 18 months before, he had sliced off his left ear with a razor in December of 1888. So, very alarming behavior. This notorious incident continued a lot more of debilitating attacks that kind of left him very confused and incoherent for several days or weeks at a time. Between his breakdowns, he enjoyed painting, which he described spells of calmness and lucidity. So it's kind of interesting that over the course of his life, he painted 75 paintings and over 100 drawings and sketches. He is known as one of the greatest artists of all time, painting in total 2,100 stunning pictures, some which are worth millions of dollars today. If you didn't know that he was the painter of Starry Night. There are several 3D museums and exhibits. There's places like Cincinnati, Dallas, Grand Rapids, Michigan. They also do this 3D exhibit around the world, so you should check to see if it's in your area, and you should definitely go because we are going to be planning to go this summer for sure. Just for a weekend, go see some art.
We are. Yes, I am.
We actually went to a museum here in Traverse City, which was
Penis on the wall.
Yes, we went to. It's called the Denos Museum. It was it's the second, yeah, the second largest museum of Inuit culture. It's really interesting. It just like had such a weird energy in there. It was very interesting. I would definitely go back. We actually got to go for free because we got there an hour before they closed. So.
Oh yeah, there was a lot of protesting going on when we were out there. Guys, they had that town hall meeting or whatever.
Yeah, it was a town hall where they were basically protesting like Elon Musk and Doge and all that. So, I mean, seems like these people have a little common sense in this area.
I guess.
I don't think that Elon, as a billionaire, should be running any federal office as somebody who has not been even in the government at all. He's just a billionaire who has made a lot of decisions on behalf of people that he's not even ever been in charge of or doesn't really have a ton of knowledge about.
What the president does anyway?
Yeah, that's definitely what's going on right now, but there's too much politics to get into that. So we are just going to get into these next few people. So this is another person whom I didn't know about. Donny Hathaway, who Justin Timberlake dubbed as one of the greatest artists of all time, known for his hits like This Christmas and You've Got a Friend, was diagnosed with schizophrenia at the time of the height of his career, and he stopped taking his medications that was helping him. Shortly after, his career quickly declined, and he died by suicide in January of 1979. Then there is old DB, Dirty Bastard, member of the hip-hop group Wu-Tang. He enjoyed his solo success with his hits Got Your Money and Shimmy Shimmy Ya. And also his remix of Fantasy by Mariah Carey. He's known for being eccentric and at times being very erratic, like storming the stage 11 years before Kanye West interrupted singer Sean Colvin's in 1998 Grammy acceptance speech to announce that Wu-Tang is for the children. And DB was a hero in many respects by organizing a group of people to help him after a car accident in which a child was trapped underneath. He reportedly visited the hospital of the child, was also assumed there several times after the incident. So he was also known for his often drug-related offenses, and he was diagnosed with schizophrenia after 3 months of being hospitalized in 2003. He sadly died in 2004 from complications stemming from a crack cocaine addiction, as well as the mixing of that with his current medications. So I did not know that that's how he died.
Yeah, me neither.
All right. Now, this next one is very interesting. I actually did not know about this at all. Jake Lloyd, who starred as young Anakin Skywalker in Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, retired from acting 2 years after the blockbuster release because apparently he was being bullied from the press and in the public at the time. In 2008, after suffering auditory and visual hallucinations of being followed, he was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. In June of 2015, Lloyd was arrested for reckless driving and resisting arrest after refusing to stop at a red light, and this ensued a high-speed police chase in South Carolina. His mother later told TMZ at the time of his arrest that the police refused to administer Lloyd's psychiatric medication. Lloyd's mother later revealed that the former actor's mental health suffered from even more traumatic stress after his sister's death in 2018. In May of 2023, it was reported that Lloyd had a psychotic break and turned off his mother's car in the middle of a busy freeway. He was hospitalized and sent to inpatient treatment for 18 months, and he had great improvement, but is still diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. I had no idea.
I didn't have any idea that happened. I mean, it's crazy.
Yeah. Aaron Carter is another child star who struggled. He was actually diagnosed with bipolar disorder, multiple personality disorder, which is also called dissociative identity disorder, as well as schizophrenia. Carter became known for his platinum-selling pop album at just 9 years old with hits like How I Beat Shaq, and made headlines in the early 2000s for a love triangle with Lindsay Lohan and Hilary Duff. I totally forgot about that. And he is frequently known as the shadow of his older brother, Nick Carter, who was singer for the Backstreet Boys. So you remember Aaron Carter?
Yeah, I remember when all was going on TV and things like that, so.
That is pretty crazy. Aaron struggled with substance abuse and mental illness into his adulthood. He died in November of 2022 at age 34. So, very young. But it is also noted that people with schizophrenia also do not tend to live long lives. So that's not just due to the medication, that's kind of just due to a multiple of environmental factors there as well. But just interesting to note there. Sir Isaac Newton had schizophrenia. He was the man who discovered gravity. And in the late 1600s, he struggled with very abrupt mood changes, as well as delusions and psychotic episodes. In addition to his gravity discovery, he also invented calculus and building telescopes. So, very interesting there. So, we said all of that to say that not everybody who has schizophrenia are just better to be locked away in a room somewhere, never to be seen or heard again from anyone. But there have been many actors, musicians, artists, and scientists who have known to be very influential in their respective fields. So, somebody from Reddit posted this, which I find very interesting. Modern medicine says that it's a disease and gives you medicine to block the ability to make you quote-unquote better. However, this ability to interact with other dimensions can have a emotional and psychological toll on a person, and this can make them appear ill. But the bottom line is maybe the medical community does not like this communication for some reason. Not sure if all psychologists or psychiatrists are in on it, though. The top reply for this says, I work in the ER in an emergency psych unit, and I can 100% say that this is an accepted hypothesis that is being swept under the rug. The main issue is that the DSM will not change the medical coding. Hopefully we can start showing awareness to get a revision in how these psychiatric units treat these illnesses. And another Reddit poster says, not sure about shamans since I have zero experience with them, but I'm pretty sure I wouldn't want to be schizophrenic either way. I tend to think that we can all interact or at least see other parallel dimensions to some degree at times, whether they be running on the same timeline as our own, in the past, or in the future. Just interesting conversation there. We are going to be talking about shamanism as we get into the case study of Dick Russell's son, Franklin.
Dick?
Yeah, his name is Dick.
Dick.
So, which this book, My Mysterious Son, is seriously one of the most incredible books I've ever read as a nonfiction. I mean, it's somebody's take on just experiencing that unconditional love with their child, even though they, say or do hurtful things because of their mental illness, but we will get into that.
They called him Dick.
Yeah.
I might be a dick, but
That is 100% true. Just kidding. So, there are possible causes to why people get schizophrenia. So, possible causes are being in a panic situation, experiencing some sort of reality loss. So that's also another cause. Also, depression, addiction, being very angry, or also having identity issues can be causes. Generally, it's a mixture of many different things, especially your environment and underlying traumas. So, do people with schizophrenia have a lot of visual hallucinations? What do you think?
I would say yeah, and just I don't really know everything at all, but as a person who would just doesn't know a lot about anything, just general knowledge, I would say I would think mainly with visualization, my understanding of what I would think schizophrenia more or less is.
So, visual hallucinations in psychotic disorders, especially with schizophrenia, when it comes to visual hallucinations, they are normally projected either just beyond reach of the individuals or like a little further away. There are often images of people, faces, animals, inanimate objects, or events. Commonly, the visions are very frightening. Sometimes they also include bugs crawling on them, dogs, snakes, distorted faces. Normally, those kinds of frightening hallucinations are linked to some kind of distress in some way, whether it's mental or physical. There are visions of God, angels, devils, saints, and fairies. These are actually very common. It's also noted that these individuals are often aware of things that others cannot perceive. For example, I heard a person who was speaking in front of a class. This was a few decades ago, but they themselves said that there is horns coming out of their head and they can only see them when they look in a mirror, and that the horns made them look like the devil. And to everybody who was in the classroom, they were kind of shocked and just like, this person is crazy. But apparently, that person had schizophrenia. So, visual hallucinations occur in 16 to 72% of schizophrenics at some point during the course of their illness, and this impact can be very underestimated, especially to people who are having hallucinations and are not visually telling people around them that they are having them. But hallucinations of the visual type are not the most common things that people with schizophrenia deal with. It's just kind of a symptom, but the people who do experience the visual hallucinations typically have them more frequently than people who don't. So, like, let's say somebody has schizophrenia, but they don't have visual hallucinations. They have auditory hallucinations, so they hear the voices rather than seeing them. That's more common than to have the visuals. So, it's not saying that it's completely rare, but I mean, it's again more typical in people who have schizophrenia. So, hallucinations by schizophrenics are typically a distortion of whatever they are observing or the information that's coming in from what they're seeing. They can also hear something that is not in the same vicinity as them, and this is just their interpretation of the world, that they have auditory hallucinations all the time.
An hallucination always out to get them.
Well, this has to do with like the paranoia. So, people who have schizophrenia typically have also a lot of paranoia. So, the voices are saying, like, I'm watching you, or stuff like that. And that makes them, in turn, react a little crazy because they feel like somebody's watching them that they can't see. So, sometimes the auditory hallucinations can say things about their family or just things to scare them, and if you are experiencing that, you're going to get scared, especially if you've never experienced that before. Complex visual hallucinations also affect schizophrenic patients, especially in the onset before sleep. So, this is often associated with a sleeping disturbance. So, the content of these hallucinations can be pretty stereotyped, especially in the media. So, in, let's say, shows or movies, they'll kind of make these hallucinations very bright and very dramatic, which, yes, they can be very bright and dramatic, but not for everybody. Sometimes they say that the hallucinations they experience are just black and white. Sometimes they say that it's almost like a ghost, or that they have the ability to perceive ghosts. They can either hear them, or let's just say they can actually see them for what they look like, which I am a big believer in the paranormal. Although I've had very little paranormal experiences, I don't discredit people who have had paranormal experiences.
We got Fred at the house.
Yes, we do have a ghost at the house, which makes a lot of noise in the upstairs.
That's nice.
I hope so, because if he's not, it's not good for us. Yeah, we hear like creaking upstairs and like almost like someone's like walking up the stairs, but like that's like really the only thing that we've experienced, really, or me and him, anyways. I mean,
His name is Fred. He lives there. He says hi.
so here are some common signs of schizophrenia, and here are the most common signs. One is delusions, strongly held false beliefs that, despite the evidence around them, they still believe. There's also hallucinations. Then there's also the hallucinations, which is the sensory and auditory hallucinations, seeing shadow figures, hearing voices. They also have disorganized speech, so this is the difficulty of expressing their thoughts clearly and in a logical manner. There's unusual movements, behaviors outside of the normal, such as random movements, especially with their arms or legs. Then there's negative symptoms, such as decreased behaviors, emotions, or motivations. So that's normally like not wanting to shower or not wanting to go out and get the mail because they don't want the government to see that they're opening their mail or something like that. You know, like they have very weird ways of, I guess, perceiving information, especially if it's not true and they still 100% believe it. That's part of the delusion. So people with schizophrenia may not recognize their symptoms in the active phase, but others around them might. So these symptoms can lead to such as things like suspicion, fear, neglect of hygiene, depression, anxiety, thoughts of suicide, and turning to substances like alcohol or drugs for coping. There are things known as positive symptoms of schizophrenia. So the positive, yeah, so the negative symptoms are, the hallucinations. But the symptoms that are, I guess, noted as positive symptoms, such as disorganized thinking, may be able to be differently communicated in terms of learning. So they can have very disorganized thinking or thoughts, but that disorganized thinking can make them smarter at math, smarter in science, smarter in, healthcare in some cases. So it's just, there's different complex natures of schizophrenia and the challenges. They also deal with, with the sensory distortions. We've already talked about, the delusions. So they deal with false beliefs, which their beliefs can have literally no basis in reality. So they can think that they're on the run from being persecuted. They can have religious false beliefs that they are a prophet of some kind. They can be very grandiose false beliefs, as if they are David from the Bible, or that they are Sir Isaac Newton and they are being reincarnated or something like that. They also believe sometimes that the FBI, the police, or a spy is after them and can hear them through the TV or through their radio or through their phone. They feel like they're being stalked, tricked, or framed or hunted.
Yeah, but why is like a lot of them feel
It has to do with that frontal lobe of the brain being so decreased. So like that's your ability to plan, your ability to think things through. So this contributes to like the false beliefs, basically. So they also can sometimes have delusions that mean that certain events or words that are being, somewhere, like let's say on a sign or like a street sign or on the TV, on the news, they'll think that the messages are saying something completely different than what they're not even saying. So they can actually fully believe, you know, see something that's not even there. They'll also think maybe sometimes when listening to a song that the song is personal to them and that a, pop musician, hip hop, whatever, that they wrote this song about them and are quote unquote in love with them. Like wholeheartedly believe that. So, very weird. There's also religious delusions, so thinking that they are the incarnation of Archangel Michael, or that they are possessed by a demon. They also have other kind of social delusions about relationships that might not actually exist. And I've already said this, like thinking that a famous actor or actress is in love with them, or the 100% belief that their spouse or partner has been unfaithful to them when nothing has actually occurred. They can also believe that people don't have any desire to want to be with them sexually, and in some cases, patients have hallucinated that their sexual organs have been in the wrong places, such as their penis being in the place of their nose or ears.
mine's right here. It's right here.
Some of them can also have delusions that they believe that they are a movie star or a political leader or somebody who is very wealthy and powerful when in case they are not. So these are just some different types of delusions. The hallucinations and the delusions together can completely distort their reality and can make them act very odd. Frequent combinations of hallucinations and delusions go hand in hand with the symptoms.
Hand in hand.
You're an idiot. Is schizophrenia a gift? For many years, mental health professionals and spiritual practitioners have debated that there needs to be a balance between the medication and also spiritual interpretations. So, some people view this as a debilitating mental illness, while others see it as a doorway to unique spiritual gifts. Somebody on Reddit says that their brother was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, and he also has a family that is in the background of psychiatry and psychotherapy. And he says, my brother displayed signs of extraordinary sensitivity from a child. He was deeply connected to nature, spending hours in solitude and exploring. He also had a very easy time connecting to animals. And this sensitivity, while beautiful, also made him very vulnerable to emotional trauma, which triggered many episodes of his schizophrenia. Early signs of sensitivity may include spiritual potential that some cultures associate schizophrenia with shamanism. And in shamanic traditions, sensitivity to the unseen realms is considered prerequisite to the gift of being a healer or medicinal person. Triggers of schizophrenia can also include trauma and overwhelming emotions following a traumatic event. And schizophrenia often emerges after a significant life event. So, interesting to note there. There are many types of schizophrenia.
So what you're saying is something typically traumatic happens and then the schizophrenia comes into play?
Not all the time. but sometimes. So they're saying that can be a cause. They also say that you're born with schizophrenia and it's something that manifests in time. So, like, let's say you're born and your brain already does not have enough gray matter as somebody else's brain. So, they say that people with schizophrenia already have decreased brain matter of the gray matter, which is responsible for, like, your memories and stuff. So, yes, traumatic things can cause it, but it doesn't have to be a traumatic event that causes it. So, for people with schizophrenia, there are multiple different types, and these multiple different types are paranoid schizophrenia, disorganized and hephretic, residual, catatonic, and undifferentiated. Paranoid schizophrenia is the type that comes to mind when people think of schizophrenia, and this is often depicted in popular culture, like movies. And it is the fixed false beliefs that conflict with the delusions such as hallucinations and especially the auditory hallucinations. So people with paranoid schizophrenia often have one or more delusions, auditory hallucinations. They also have symptoms that are not always prominent, like disorganized speech, being disorganized in their behaviors, or being just very, like, inappropriate and not understanding any.
So now I see why you wanted to do this topic.
No, I think it's super interesting.
Thinks I have schizophrenia, folks.
No, I think Eric's phone thinks that he has schizophrenia.
I mean,
Yeah, his ads on his phone for a minute there were literally medications for schizophrenia. So, yeah, his phone thought that he had it. So, symptoms can come and go. So, not normally all symptoms are being experienced at one time. A person with the paranoid schizophrenia may be experiencing multiple different symptoms at once or just at different times throughout their experience. Now we're going to get into disorganized or hephretic schizophrenia. So disorganized schizophrenia is also known as hephretic. Hebephoretic, might be saying it wrong, but this is a subtype of schizophrenia and it's characterized by symptoms that interrupts a person's thinking or communication. The symptoms are typically disorganized speech, disorganized behavior, or being very flat or inappropriate. And these are common challenges that they face for hephretic. Difficulty with routine tasks such as being hygienic, reacting emotionally in ways that are very inappropriate to the situation, such as like screaming or yelling, especially in a setting where that's normally not done. So let's say like you're in the store and something very minimal happens, you start acting out in ways that is not typically normal. For somebody with schizophrenia, this is something that is a normal thing. So there's also trouble with communication, such as misusing words and placing them in the wrong order. Difficulty thinking clearly and responding appropriately. Using nonsense and made-up words. Moving quickly in between thoughts without any logical connection. Forgetting and misplacing items. Walking in circles. Difficulty understanding everyday things. Giving unrelated answers to questions. Repeating of phrases or words. Trouble meeting goals. Challenges with being impulsive. Not able to make eye contact. Showing childlike behaviors and withdrawal from society, and basically.
So this is why you wanted to look up on me, huh?
Well, I mean, I've always wanted to know about schizophrenia, so if you're feeling like this has to do with you, then maybe you should get checked out.
I mean, pretty descriptive.
Of you?
Maybe somebody. Hi!
We have key lime pie that we're going to get into later, but that's going to be our reward once we finish this, so we are halfway through. So then there's residual schizophrenia. This is not the same as the residual phase. This is not the same as the residual phase of schizophrenia, but residual phase of schizophrenia is when a person's symptoms are not as intense. So they are kind of in a period of like calmness. even though they may still have negative symptoms, the residual phase is when there's kind of like a calm down in their symptoms. Person with residual schizophrenia does not have prominent delusions such as hallucinations, disorganized speech, or being highly disorganized or catatonic behavior. Instead, they have a milder form of schizophrenia. So this is trouble expressing emotions, diminished facial expressions or gestures, having odd beliefs, having unusual perceptions, typically very socially withdrawn. Other conditions of this kind of mental disorder also deal with comorbid thoughts of depression and often deal with substance abuse. Then there's catatonic schizophrenia. This is a more extreme type of schizophrenia. And the symptoms include muscle rigidity or lack of response to external stimuli, limbs remaining in an unusual position for a long time, being in a stupor, so being unresponsive to outward stimuli. Then there is actively not being influenced by any external stimuli at all, so that's excessive decreased motor activity. Then there's extreme negativism, the thought that nothing good is ever going to happen to you, and you just always think that the worst is going to happen in any situation.
That's why you don't get disappointed. That's why you don't get disappointed.
Yeah, well, having expectations is a normal human thing. But I guess some people don't having a lack of expectations doesn't mean you're schizophrenic, but this kind of lack of being positive can, I guess, be an influence of this type of catatonic schizophrenia. There's also being mute. There is also being in inappropriate or bizarre postures. I found that kind of like, what bizarre posture would you be doing out in public? Like, you're at a dentist office and you're just like humping the air, like.
Yes.
Oh my god. There's also stereotyped movements, such as involuntary repetitive physical movements, such as rocking back and forth. Oh, this one is scary. I rock back and forth too. I feel like it's a coping mechanism, but then there's also, this is scary, prominent grimacing, distorting the face in an expression that is usually in pain or disgust or disapproval, but yet somehow smiling.
Keep looking up stuff about me.
Oh my god, that scares me. Like, cause that movie Smile, the second one is not good, but the first one I thought was really good.
I didn't really like them.
I liked Smile. Smile reminded me of The Black Phone. It has like the same vibes, kind of like an 80s, 90s kind of like vibe to a horror movie, but like a modern take on it. A few more symptoms is repeating what others say or imitating the movements of others. So these are all for catatonic. Then the undifferentiated schizophrenia has symptoms that do not fit the paranoid, the catatonic, or the disorganized type. So the undifferentiated ones for their symptoms include delusions, hallucinations, paranoia, exaggerated perceptions, disorganized speech, neglect of hygiene, social withdrawal, not able to make plans, trouble thinking logically, bizarre behavior, and abnormal movements, which we've already went over all of that. But this person with undifferentiated schizophrenia typically deals with only one symptom at a time. So they don't have different things. So they don't have the hallucinations and the paranoia. They have either one or the other. Or they severely neglect their personal hygiene, but they're not really doing anything else.
Really?
Yeah, so this is typically somebody who just doesn't fit the diagnosis type because the paranoid and catatonic and disorganized typically have more than one symptom that's being shown all at once. but these symptoms are normally just one at a time. There's also childhood schizophrenia, which is not a subtype, but refers to the onset of schizophrenia at that age. It's not a separate diagnosis. There's also, if you didn't know, schizophrenia spectrum disorders. So these are not completely in line with being diagnosed with schizophrenia, but you have disorders such as schizoaffective disorder, having psychotic episodes, depression, and mania. There's the delusional disorder, so having false beliefs. And we already went into delusion, so you already know about that. There's the brief psychotic disorder. This is an episode of psychotic behavior that lasts typically a month or less. After the episode, the person goes through complete remission, and this is normally something that happens after a very traumatic event, such as a stillbirth or seeing a loved one pass away unexpectedly. These are just some examples of what can cause this, but my mom actually worked at a hospital as like a nurse's aide, and she had to watch this lady all day who had just had a stillbirth, and she was going through a complete psychotic break. So like you couldn't talk to her because she was acting like a child, she said. So she would be like, "When can we go home and get ice cream?" And then they're just like she's just talking very weird like a child would. And my mom said that it was one of the creepiest things that she ever had to deal with. As a nurse's aide, she said she dealt with a lot of things, but she was like, it just felt so creepy that she was just talking like a 10-year-old girl would.
Yeah.
But like, that's her way of dealing with the trauma. And I'm not putting down like having a stillbirth. I mean, that is seriously one of the most traumatic things that any woman can go through, in my opinion. But then there's also schizophreniform disorder. Schizophreniform disorder? I hope I'm saying that right. It's a personality disorder that can cause a person to have odd behaviors, beliefs, and perceptions that last for several months, but not longer than 6 months. So this is normally a person who typically has very limited relationships due to suspicions or paranoia that affects the relationships that they have. These suspicions normally have to do with loved ones making a plot against them or having beliefs or perceptions that are entirely untrue. So now we're going to talk about what medications these people normally take. And for people who are diagnosed with schizophrenia or on the spectrum, typically are prescribed antipsychotic medications to help them manage. These medications help address issues such as the delusions, the hallucinations, the disorganized thinking, and the mood disturbances. Here are the main types of medications that are commonly used. One, we have antipsychotic medications, primarily used to treat schizophrenia. They help reduce the symptoms that they are thinking. And the first generation of antipsychotic drugs basically were Haldol, Thorazine, and Prelixin. Then there are Risperidol, Zyprexa, and Abilify, and Clozaril. There's mood stabilizers. So in conjunction to the antipsychotic medication, the mood stabilizers help manage symptoms of the mood swings, which typically occur with people with schizophrenia. It also helps reduce irritability and anxiety to help stabilize the mood. These are things such as lithium or lamictal, which I did not know that lithium was a mood stabilizer.
Yeah. I thought so. I mean, that's what I would have thought it was used for.
Yeah, I would have always thought that I would have always thought that lithium was like an antipsychotic because I actually know people who are bipolar who take lithium, but I guess I've just never like looked it up what it specifically does, but very interesting. I did not know that. There's also antidepressants, which Normally, people with schizophrenia have depressive symptoms, so antidepressants help with the feelings of sadness, hopelessness, and low motivation. These are normally SSRIs, which I have taken several of these, which they did not work for me. But if they work for you, good. Because sometimes people don't have things that help them. And I've tried Prozac, I've tried Zoloft. Those are both SSRIs. And there's also Effexor. I have not taken that one, but that one is a neuroepinephrine reuptake inhibitor. So, and then the first two, the Prozac and the Zoloft, are serotonin reuptake inhibitors. So, there's also anti-anxiety medications such as Klonopin and Ativan. So this helps with high stress and agitation. So people who deal with severe anxiety, especially social. People who have difficulty taking their medications may have a long-acting injectable as an option. So these can last for sometimes a month to 3 months. And these are risperidone, paliperidone, and Abilify. Side effects to these medications are typically weight gain, especially with antipsychotics. They also have metabolic issues such as diabetes or high cholesterol. They have movement disorders such as tremors. They can sometimes feel sedated all the time, depending on how long their medication's side effects last for daily intake. And they can also have sexual dysfunction. So, of course, they sometimes don't want to take their medications because they're dealing with all of these side effects.
Yeah.
I mean, especially the weight gain. The weight gain is one of the most common. But just like schizophrenia affects everyone differently, the choice of medication is highly individualized. So what works for one person might not work for another. So treatment is more like trial and error. Doctors usually adjust dosages and combine other treatments like therapy. And it's crucial for individuals with schizophrenia to work with their doctors to find their best treatment plan and to also have regular follow-up visits to manage their overall well-being. So now we are going to get into the case study of the My Mysterious Son, which My Mysterious Son is not just a nonfiction novel like any other. It is a story of a family's grappling with autism and mental illness. It's a story that touches on universal themes of parental love, struggle, and resilience. The book takes us through a deeply personal journey of Dick Russel. Good old Dick. In the first few chapters, the book really puts the setting for Russell's growth Russell's growth. And as a father and as a writer, he has a very complicated relationship with his son, Franklin. And this book touched me in many ways because it's teaching me that the love and the patience of a parent who actively helps their child with their unconditional love and acceptance of that child. Dick Russel learns how to conquer his fear and his anxiety of his son's diagnosis and is basically able to go through a very transformative experience that helps shape the both of them. So these are excerpts from the book that I'm actually about to start reading. So in the autumn of 1996, Franklin was 17 when he said something to his father, Russell, and that would change the course of their lives. On the drive home from school, Franklin turned to him and said, "I don't know what's happening, but I can't find my old self again." And just months before everything seemed to be fine, Franklin had spent a wonderful time in Mexico learning how to surf and fish and reconnect with family. He even secured a full scholarship to a prestigious private prestigious private school in Boston for his junior year, but this is when his behavior started to slip, and a teacher noted that Franklin was sometimes out of touch and could not focus. It wasn't long after the new term began that Russell found something deeply troubling when he entered Franklin's room, and written in black magic marker on the wall, it says, "I am going to die, and the world will be a better place." It was then that Russell knew that he could not wait any longer, and Franklin was struggling deeply, and Russell was terrified. So, after a very traumatic evening, Franklin asked to be hospitalized. His dad agreed, and the evaluation at the hospital was both sobering and heart-wrenching, as they had noted that Franklin was experiencing acute deterioration functioning, and his symptoms were aligning with the onset of schizophrenia. And Russell knew right then that his world was falling apart and he was trying to make sense of it. Franklin wasn't the only one to just accept things without questioning them, like his father, and in a journal he wrote, "Meditation as opposed to medication. Is the answer a combination of both? Where does bipolar illness come from, and why do so many people have it?" Even then, he knew that the path to healing was not going to be a simple one, but he knew that there was some more deeper understanding that Russell, his dad, or the doctors had not discovered yet. The medications were harsh. He was given antipsychotics, mood stabilizers, antidepressants. Each one of his each one of his senses was robbed, and Russell knew that this caused his very significant weight gain of 150 pounds. Russell watched his son's spirit shrink as the years went on. At 19, Franklin moved out, wanting more independence, but he also withdrew further, and he was in and out of hospitals, staying for months at a time in certain psychiatric wards.
Huh.
One moment stands out for Dick, and that moment will never leave his memory, and that was when a doctor asked Franklin if he knew why he was in the hospital, if he even realized that he was mentally ill. Franklin's response was simple, but Russell said it hit him like a ton of bricks. He says, "My chief complaint is loneliness. I am lonely." In that moment, the doctor said, "Your son is so sane." And it made Russell realize that Franklin wasn't simply just battling with his mind, he was also fighting the isolation that you experience when you're in these hospitals.
Yeah.
So through all the medications, group homes, hospitalizations, Russell kept looking for other ways to help treat Franklin, and Franklin hated the side effects of his medications, and as he got older, he started to fight taking the medications more because of the side effects. There was one moment that he started refusing necessary blood tests. So that means he was not able to take his Clozaril anymore. So then they switched him to Zyprexa, which was even worse, where he gained another 100 pounds. This was also the onset to his adult diabetes diagnosis, and his dad was furious because they changed the pharmaceutical company behind Zyprexa behind his back, changed also the ingredients, never informed anyone, and then by this time he was almost like 200 pounds heavier than he was in high school.
Crazy.
So then they started a lawsuit against Eli Lilly, and one morning in 2007, at a particularly rough patch in the Boston hospital, Russell drove Franklin to a new place called Earth House, a treatment center in rural New Jersey. It was not a cheap option, but with the help of Russell's brother, they made it work for a time. Earth House was not like any psychiatric ward or hospital. It was a group home, and it combined regimented exercise, organic diet, and alternative therapies, and the results were basically miraculous, but it was also very expensive. Apparently, staying there at the time was the cost of a yearly mortgage at a house. So,
Makes sense.
yeah, it's very expensive. But this was at the time in like 1970, 1980 when houses were like $29,000.
Yeah.
Even though this miracle would not last forever, the cost of Earth cows became too great, and Russell found himself back to square one. He was left wondering, what now? With the question of where could they go from here, and how was Franklin going to get better? And it was during one of the lowest points that a glimmer of hope came from an unlikely source, which was a trip with their pediatrician to Tanzania. So, their pediatrician was not born in Tanzania, but he went there yearly because that's where his heritage was. So, that's where his parents came from. So, suggesting a trip to Africa seemed like a wild idea at first. Franklin was 32, Russell was 64, but the trip could have been a fix to some of their problems. So they went. And the experience was unlike anything Russell had ever experienced in his life. And in Tanzania, they faced a series of moments. One in particular stands out. Franklin disappeared at a bush camp for a night and another night, and he became extremely angry with his dad, Russell, for being too controlling. So then, as they sat alone in the dark, Franklin began speaking and soaring into monologue that was beyond anything Russell could have ever imagined. He was terrified. He was unsure if Franklin would ever come back to reality. And in that moment, Franklin saw things that Russell did not understand, but Russell didn't know also how to process what his son was seeing. So it was like that one night when, having like all of his symptoms return, it was like they both broke down. And that night in Africa marked the beginning of a new chapter for them. As it was, apparently it felt like Franklin had crossed into another dimension where he was not just a child with schizophrenia, but in Africa he was regarded as a man of wisdom and had insight that most people didn't see or understand. So Franklin was realizing that he wasn't just mentally ill, he was in tune with seeing a world in a way that most people can't normally comprehend. And in this role reversal, his dad understood that his son was more than his diagnosis. Franklin was a teacher. And Franklin said at one point, if you are trying to cross a river, you take a boat. If you have no boat, you either make one or swim. If you can't swim, then grab onto a log. If there's no logs, swing from a vine. If you do not succeed, then try again. So Franklin was becoming to be more active than he'd ever been in years. He was attending music and art therapy. He resumed classes at a technical college. He was basically actually having a life in Africa more than he ever did in Western society. So what Russell learned through all of this is simple, is that Franklin's journey is not his to control. It's Franklin's. And he's shown that to his dad that life doesn't always follow a predictable course, but sometimes the most profound lessons come in the most mysterious of places. And Dick Russel is grateful for his son's diagnosis for teaching him how to be a better dad. So
That'd be tough. That'd be tough for any parent or anyone.
dealing with a loved one having schizophrenia, yeah. I mean, it's hard to argue with them when they're not in reality. And during their time in Africa, Franklin basically disappeared for a night in the remote bush camp. This was causing his dad to be very scared. It caused a lot of tension and distress because, in Africa you're dealing with a lot of wild animals. And, his son ended up actually waking up in somebody else's tent. It was just a man and a woman's tent. And they came back into their tent after going hunting. And they said, "Excuse me, what are you doing in here?" And he goes, "Go away, I'm sleeping." And then they said, "This is our tent." And he said, "No, it's not. This is my tent."
We've all been there before. We've woken up on a few different places you shouldn't be.
So then in the morning, they saw this couple saying, "Get out, get out." And then that's when they found him. They were like, he was like, "Is my son in there?" Yeah, he's been sleeping in our bed all night. So, basically, when in Africa, Franklin's psychic abilities, which have always been part of him, became more pronounced but also accepted. He had moments of deep insight, a deep connection to the land, to the people, and to the spiritual world. Apparently, he had a conversation with a shaman who would later become a guiding figure in his spiritual journey, and Malidoma, the name of the spiritual teacher, was able to interpret Franklin's drawings and writings as a evidence of deep spiritual connection to ancient cultures and cosmic energies. And he said that Franklin was in connection to the ancient Mayan, Egyptian, and Native American traditions. Franklin had visions and altered perceptions that were symptoms of schizophrenia, as they were labeled. He began to see himself as figures that he was not, but when he saw himself as those figures, he also experienced these downloads of information. So at one point, he thought that he was a Chinese man. Well, he also somehow learned Chinese language without ever reading it, but could say words and phrases in Chinese when he became that person. So, like, that's evidence of taking on energies, but other people can say that's just possession.
It's weird for sure.
Well, the idea of shamanism is the path to healing and understanding, which has a deeper connection with the world around them, and visions and dreams are not delusions, but they are seen as communication to the higher realms. So this also involves rituals and practices that help connect them to ancestors of the spiritual world. In the years that followed Franklin's exploration into shamanism, he traveled to spiritual centers around the world. His journey was filled with many challenges, but he said that he didn't feel like he was just a man with an illness, but he was a man who was experiencing a spiritual awakening. So this was very inspiring for his dad because, I mean, his dad knew that there's no cure for schizophrenia in the Western world or the Eastern world, but at least in the Eastern world, their path to healing is so much more different because it is more getting with the spiritual than it is taking medications. So, Franklin's transformation into shamanism marked a very pivotal point in his life. It was a path that allowed him to reclaim his sense to himself and also to understand his illness in a new light. That, yes, he may have more unique gifts of the mind and spirit that we don't. And this also brought him closer to his father as they both learned to navigate this very complexive light complexities of the life struggle. But before we end it, we are going to just talk about what shamanism is. So, shamanism is an ancient spiritual practice that has been the heartbeat of indigenous cultures around the globe for thousands of years. It is the set of rituals or beliefs that seeing the world connects us as humans to mysteries, which is the core of the shamanism. It basically means that a tree, a river, or an animal holds a spirit of energy, and that shamans, who are spiritual leaders in their communities, have a easier ability to interact with these spirits as a bridge to the physical world, to the unseen realm. So they're seen as healers, but they're also seen as people who deal with spiritual sicknesses, emotional traumas, or unseen forces that affect a person's well-being.
I don't know. It's just weird to me. I guess there's a lot more to this topic than just people being crazy-ish. We're not crazy, but like seeing things and, for lack of a better term, hallucinating stuff. So there's, I guess, more to it when you're talking about shamans. Like, yeah, people see stuff, but they constantly see stuff.
It's not always constant though, because they have symptoms that appear and disappear. So basically, shamans enter altered states of consciousness through drumming, chanting, dancing, and the use of sacred plants. In these altered states, they leave behind the ordinary world and venture into what is called the non-ordinary reality. Yep, that's part of it. That's the chanting. In this state, they are able to communicate with spirits, ancestors, or with nature itself. These journeys are symbolic, and they are also seen as real experiences where they travel to other realms, communicate with other spiritual beings, such as spirit animals, which are often considered guides. These animals in particular represent qualities or teachings that shamans need to understand. So, the wolf offers wisdom, teaching about loyalty and leadership, but the eagle is often seen as the animal that provides insight to the bigger picture. So shamans often possess deep understanding of the natural world, using plants and herbs in their healing practices. Healing is not just physical wounds, but physical wounds can also have extensions on a person's spirit. So feeling mentally confused, dealing with a broken heart, feeling disconnected from the world, almost like, you're completely alone when you're not, is considered as a mental ailment in shamanism, which is honestly kind of beautiful because normally in our world those things are just seen as like, you'll get over it, but they see it as like a mental wound.
One way to deal with your problems.
It's the worst way. You
Hey,
need to. Yes, you are.
Works.
Well, one of the foundational aspects of shamanism is the idea of animism, which is the belief that everything in the world is alive, imbued with some type of spirit. The stone holds wisdom as much as the tree offers protection, as the river provides a guide into somebody's destiny, or the connection to nature is also the belief that lifeless objects are living, breathing energies that play a vital role into the scheme of life, which I believe wholeheartedly that there's consciousness to animals as there is to plants. So I agree with that.
Yeah, I would say stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, because there's like an energy that's being projected from any rock or even flower. It's like once you pull that flower out from the ground, why does it die if it wasn't alive? You know what I mean?
Well, that's because it was alive.
Yeah, that's
The
what I'm
rock's
saying.
not necessarily the same thing as a plant.
But they still hold energy of some kind.
I'm not saying they don't. I'm just saying.
Well, when someone says that you're dumb as a box of rocks, I mean they're obviously comparing you to
I guess. I suppose.
very dense.
Um, yeah.
So there's also shamanic rituals, such as communal events, where drumming, singing, and dancing is used to help shift the energy of the collective. These ceremonies are used for personal healing, protection from harm, and also marking a significant life event such as birth or transition into adulthood helps reinforce a sense of belonging and interconnectedness. It's very cool. One of the most fascinating aspects about shamanism is the power of the rituals. So, shamans use rituals to honor spirits, seek guidance, or to heal, and these rituals often involved using sacred objects that have been used for hundreds of thousands of years. And holding these sacred objects have extreme meaning to them, such as the drum beat is a serve to summon, whether it's a spirit or a trance-like state, while the feather is used to connect to the spirit of the wind. Each movement of sound or gesture is done with intention to serve for a greater purpose. So, one of the most remarkable things about shamanism is the way that it blurs the boundary between the material and the spiritual worlds. So basically, they think that the spirit realm isn't just a distant place you go after you die. It's around all of us and exists simultaneously with the physical world. So shamans typically have an ability to see or interact with both realms simultaneously. They may walk from the physical world into the spiritual world, but they can have these connections and get these messages that we don't typically get.
Yeah.
So that sounds a lot, though, like schizophrenia. So, but this is in Africa. Although there are shamans all around the world, schizophrenia in the Western world is deemed as you are a harm to yourself and to society. Meanwhile, you go to Africa and they think that you are in touch with the spiritual world more than others.
Well, I guess it's also a matter of what you're doing with it. If you are.
I feel like it also has to do with like diet and the way that also, yes, mental illness is taken more seriously now, but it's also something that people discredit themselves a lot. So they don't see, like in the active phase of schizophrenia, you don't know that you're sick, but
Yeah.
others around you do. They're like, you are not
Yeah,
right in the
obviously
head.
you're seeing what you're gonna be seeing or whatever, and it's just yeah.
And sometimes families don't think that mental illness is real. So they think, oh, maybe he's just possessed or something, and they call the priest. They try to do an exorcism when they're just mentally ill. And there's actually physical evidence of their mental illness. Like I said, it's something like, it's almost like Parkinson's. It's the same thing. You are actually having physical symptoms in your brain that are manifesting. So the pressures of contemporary life, mental health struggles, trauma, isolation, have pushed people to look to alternative paths for healing, and shamanism offers something different than what mainstream practices. It offers a direct connection to the spiritual, teaching others that the answers that we seek are not just outside of us, but they are within us, and that the universe is constantly sending messages, and if we are open up and if we are open enough to receive them, we can basically accept these practices. So it's an alternative way of healing, and shamanism is about awakening to the deeper reality. The boundaries of space and time are fluid like water. The spiritual and material worlds are not separate, but are working together simultaneously in an interconnected process of the mind, body, and spirit. So, in many ways, schizophrenia and shamanism are two worlds that, if you dig deeper, are very similar. So, the moment that you realize someone who is struggling with schizophrenia experiencing altered states of reality, they might hear voices that you can't hear or see things that you can't see. But they might be convinced that they are receiving messages from some higher power or feel like they are living in a reality that's separate from everyone else's. Now picture the shaman who is intentionally seeking the altered states of consciousness. They enter a trance through rituals, chanting, the use of plants, and
I've seen some things on some plants.
and these experiences are similar to what people with schizophrenia might go through. And we already understand that the difference between them both is a lot of those are short term, but if you have some predispositions to schizophrenia, you might experience them more often than others. In some cultures, the perception of reality that comes with schizophrenia might not be dismissed as an illness at all, but is seen as a spiritual gift. In many indigenous cultures, recognize that certain individuals that speak with spirits or understand these layers of existence are not viewed as delusional, but viewed as a shaman. So, the idea of communicating with spirits is being able to connect with entities from other worlds, such as spirits, ancestors, divine beings, aliens, through their trances, and they basically receive messages of guidance and healing or events. Why do you say that?
The guy who says he's talking to aliens isn't schizophrenic, but
Well, I guess I don't even like following people on social media that are like, the aliens told me something last night. I'm just like, that, like.
Might have, but I don't know.
Yeah, well, it is kind of weird, but I'm not saying people who say they are communicating with aliens are schizophrenic. I'm just making a joke. But
Come on.
it is a little weird, but basically schizophrenia is normally a deep sense of loneliness that makes them feel cut off from everyone else. This makes them get distant. This makes them seem out of sync with reality, feeling alienated. And during isolation, I guess for someone with schizophrenia, it can be very painful. And for the shaman, though, they use isolation to search for spiritual meaning. So, I mean, the similarity there is not very prominent because, the more alone a schizophrenic person is, the more they're kind of subject to not reacting very well. But schizophrenia and shamanism, in their own way, deal with exploring other realities. A person with schizophrenia may feel as if they entered a new realm full of strange voices, images, and ideas, or ideas of events that others can't access. It can be terrifying, especially without the right support, and a shaman intentionally crosses into other realms to, I guess, basically serve their community. But the person who's schizophrenic isn't wanting to experience that. That's just a symptom. And healing for both schizophrenic and the shaman is also about reconciliation. So it's a process of making sense of their experiences and, I guess, using rituals can help integrate two realities.
I've been in two different realities before, and there was no integrating them.
On what?
On mushrooms, definitely. Definitely on mushrooms, but...
Yeah, I've had some weird times on mushrooms. Very weird times. But one question that some of you maybe are thinking after all of this, is schizophrenia curable? What do you think?
Curable?
Is it curable?
I would guess not.
That is correct. Schizophrenia is a condition that many people struggle to understand because it's not something that can be cured. The reality is, schizophrenia is not curable right now, but with the right treatment and support, it can be managed. Schizophrenia is a complex mental illness. The main reason it isn't curable has to do with the biological and genetic roots. Researchers believe that schizophrenia has a strong genetic component, meaning that if it runs in your family, you are at higher risk of developing it. But it's not just about genetics. Environmental stressors play a role too. So, what makes it more challenging is that the condition affects the brain in ways that can't be undone. Brain imaging often shows people with schizophrenia have structural differences in large ventricles, reduced gray matter, and these changes change how the brain processes information, and they can't just reverse that without medication.
I'm pretty sure you looked this up because you think certain things about me.
I think maybe you're feeling like you have this.
I'm thinking that you thinking I'm thinking that I'm thinking that.
Nope, I'm not thinking that at all, but the fact that you think you do is kind of funny.
I'm pretty sure there's a reason you picked this topic.
No.
You think it's me?
No, but the fact that you think it's you is pretty funny.
It's pretty descriptive.
Yeah, well, there are some similarities here. Eric is very withdrawn. You are very withdrawn.
I'll let you know how the pie was.
Okay, no you won't. Oh my
God. I'll let you know.
Well, schizophrenia does not just go away. It's something that people live with for life.
Well, that's good.
Yeah, so,
any hope at the end of this story?
well, some struggle with more severe cases or just episodes, but medication and therapy can help reduce symptoms, and Basically, it can't be cured, but that doesn't mean hope is lost. Treatments today can make a huge difference. Antipsychotic meds really help with the hallucinations and the delusions. There's also cognitive behavioral therapy, which helps develop strategies to manage your stress and individual emotions. On top of that, maintaining a healthy lifestyle, such as exercising, eating good, and managing your stress, such as getting good night's sleep every night, can also help better manage schizophrenia in your everyday life, and also avoid substances like drugs or alcohol, which can trigger your symptoms if your predisposition to it to make it worse. So, the truth is we have come a long way in treating schizophrenia, and research is moving forward. So, scientists know that genetics plays a role, neurobiology plays a role, as well as your brain. So, hopefully we discover better treatments and a cure. But for now, we know that the medical field does help these people to live as good of a life as they can by managing symptoms and offering support.
Misdiagnosed, whatever. I don't know about that, but we've definitely mistreated the schizophrenia people.
Well, schizophrenics really were on the short end of the stick for the long time, is because they were dealing with people saying they were possessed, or they were, they just weren't being validated in their illness. So, and they were also thrown in asylums with people who just had like birth defects.
Where there's now a mall.
Yeah. Which, go to the one in Traverse City. It's called the Traverse Commons shopping area. It was so weird.
And then it has a nursing home attached to it too.
Yeah, so people live there. A senior living center. It's so weird.
Sending your parents there, like, here you go.
That's terrible. That place is so haunted, probably. But, so while schizophrenia remains a lifelong challenge, the good news is with proper treatment and care, your symptoms can be very effectively managed. So it might not be easy or a quick fix, but there is hope now compared to what there was even 50 years ago. So, thank you for listening to today's episode. I hope you enjoyed the story and the research that we did, or I did, on this. Remember that mental health is a journey, and that if you or someone you know and care about is struggling, reaching out can be a very necessary step to help them. So,
I think she's trying to get me to say something here.
I think you think that you have this.
Trying to do it all.
I'm talking to our audience, not to you.
She's trying to trick me.
So if you enjoyed today's episode, please consider subscribing, sharing, and leaving a review. It helps spread the word about the Chatterbox. So if you have any questions or thoughts, feel free to reach out to our email in the description or put a comment. So remember, until next time, keep it chatty, keep it nice, and keep it sweet, because we will not be keeping this short. So remember to take care of yourselves and each other. You're not alone on this mental health journey. Thank you for being here with us, and have a good week.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me.